Okay, so the questions people had, there was a question on the rise of Europe, a couple of questions on the rise of Europe. Why did science develop in Europe despite the Galileo incident? And one thing I've been telling people who've been coming in to talk to me about how to do better on their exams is I've been trying to show them the connection between the PowerPoint and the exam questions and the review sheet. So the question, why did science develop in Europe despite the Galileo incident? Okay, here's Galileo. Okay. I had several PowerPoints lecturing about it just to kind of give you a narrative, but then I also included a summary. And here's some reasons. And these are the main reasons I'm looking for. Remember, religious views in Europe encouraged science initially. Christianity was not anti-science at this time. Of course, there's different forms of Christianity taking different perspectives on science, but this time, basically, Christianity was favorable towards science in the Middle Ages and then into the scientific revolution. There was an idea that God had made the universe and God had given you reason, so using your reason to understand the universe was just fine. In addition, medieval universities, remember, these universities were independent from state control. The medieval universities were independent from state control. They had their own sources of funding, so they had the freedom to pursue science. There was no one who could really come in and stop them from doing it. And remember, they rewarded people. You got a promotion or you got paid more or something if you made an innovation. So if you figured out something new. So that's, you had these universities that had independence and the freedom to pursue science and rewarded people who did that. There are also, science and scientists were spread all throughout Europe. I want to see if science and scientists were spread all throughout Europe. And what this meant was, basically two things. Was you had this very large community of scientists. One of the things I wanted to emphasize is science is not something that people just do on their own. It takes a community of people. And the example I gave of that was this guy, Nicholas Copernicus. Remember, even though he's the guy that kind of figures out that it's the sun that's in the center and the earth goes around it, he does that based on the ideas of a lot of different scientists. He doesn't just do it on his own. So the science, so that's one thing about this point is that they have a community, but also, even when someone like Galileo gets into trouble, there's other scientists in other places in Europe who can continue doing research. So even when some religious authorities say, well, we don't want this kind of new science, they can't destroy it completely because it's too far spread. And like I said, most don't actually want to destroy it completely. So that kind of answers that question. And connected to that is someone had asked about the term Galileo. Of course, here's Galileo right here, and we talked about how he gets into trouble because he teaches this idea that the Earth goes around the sun is a fact. He says this is a fact. He puts it in a book published in Italian and makes fun of the Pope, and because of that, he gets arrested. Now, one thing I wanted to stress was, even though sometimes we think of this as science versus religion, we have to remember Galileo remained a believing Catholic throughout this period. This was a disagreement about science between two religious people. Right, it's a disagreement about science between two religious people. They had different understandings of their religion. But what is important to understand, I think, in particular about Galileo, is that he's a scientist using this new knowledge of science to challenge the old ideas. And that ends up also being kind of a political challenge as well. Now, one reason there's this concern about Galileo is you have these wars of religion going on. You have this idea that if people question the religion, they're also questioning the government because the government and religion are married. So he's kind of seen, in this case, science is challenging the political, social, and religious order of the day, and that's why Galileo gets into trouble. So, important guy. Okay, how did Enlightenment thinkers criticize society? Remember, the Enlightenment thinkers are people who were inspired by science, who say, okay, science, these people like Galileo and Nicholas Copernicus, they can figure out all these, they understand science, they understand how the universe works, they were able to discover these things through reason. Well, let's apply human reason to our society. Let's apply human reason to society and use that to figure out how to build a better society. And that's where you have people like Adam Smith, Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. Those are all Enlightenment thinkers. And they're criticizing society in accordance with reason. Right? They're willing to question authority, political authority, religious authority, If you tell one of the Enlightenment thinkers, well, we should do this because that's what God wants, they're going to say, well, let's see if what you claim God wants is reasonable. So when you think of the Enlightenment thinkers, think reason. Right? And one thing that can also be a clue to you about this, most of the American founding fathers are connected to the Enlightenment. People like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, they're sharing these kind of ideas. So any questions on section 3? Okay, moving on then. Section 4, Rise of Europe. There was a lot of questions on this one. Lots of people had questions also about the term, so I'll go into those shortly. So why did the Industrial Revolution develop first in Britain? Again, you can see kind of a connection here. I gave a list of 6 reasons why it developed in Britain first, so that's a fairly easy one to fill out. And one thing I did this time that I loaded differently, I put the, you have the hard copy of the review sheet. Oh, by the way, does anyone need a copy? I printed off a couple extras if we have anyone who needs a copy. Okay. And what I did this time is a little different. I also put an online copy. Anybody else need a copy? Okay. Don't want extra? Take home, parents, friends. So I put up I put on an online copy of the review sheet, so that if you want to type on it directly, you can, right? You can download the file and type on it directly. So you could even copy this into the review sheet from the PowerPoint, because this is just an old PowerPoint slide. So why does it first occur in Britain? The British were already getting wealthy from trade, and so they had money that they could do something with. And the consumer demand that came from this increased wealth, if you get money in your pocket, you want to spend it, that led the British to want to figure out new ways to increase production. The British were also good scientists. Sir Isaac Newton is British. John Watt was British. And John Watt in particular is going to develop steam power, which is going to be the kind of engine that drives the Industrial Revolution. Britain also had lots of cheap coal and cheap iron. If your country, say like Thailand, for example, Thailand doesn't have lots of iron and coal. It's very difficult for them to engage in a full-scale industrial revolution. Britain has it though. The British also had gone through kind of that capitalist economic revolution, so they had banks that were very good for allowing them to mobilize capital to buy machines. The British also protected property rights, so that if you invented something, no one could just come in and steal your idea. They had to pay you for it. And the British were also able to engage with free trade with independent Latin America to feed workers. They could buy cheap beef and cheap wheat from Latin American countries that they could then use to feed their workers. Right? You can't have an industrial revolution if everyone has to farm. Right? You have to be able to move people off the farm into factories and then buy food to use to feed them. If any of these things are missing, you're not going to have an industrial revolution at the beginning. To get the first industrial revolution, you have to have these 6 things at least. And that's one reason why, for example, the Zulus were not able to go through an industrial revolution. They didn't have all 6 of these things. And because they didn't have that power, and that's one reason they were colonized eventually. Okay, so another question people had was number 5, what is nationalism? How has it spread? How did it threaten multi-ethnic empires? So if you watch the videos, and if you should still have the links if anyone wants them, or that was our Snow Week, I put up the videos I had that talked about this question. But I start off with this video from Psy, the Gangnam Style guy. He's also made an Olympic fight song for Koreans to cheer them on in the Olympics. And in the key thing I showed that video for was it showed how if you have all the people of the nation united, it gives you a lot of power, right? You can think of it like home court advantage, right? If you're an athlete, you always want to play on your home court because that gives you a big advantage. It helps to inspire you because you can hear the people cheering and so forth. And that's why I showed this video, because it focused on all these different people coming together to cheer on their country. And that's key. They weren't coming together and saying, go Muslims or go Baptists or go factory workers. They were coming together to cheer on go Koreans, right? The focus is on your identity as your nationality, right? So all Koreans, old, young, men, women, are supposed to unite together to cheer on the team. So by uniting together according to our nationality, our ethnicity in this case, we're able to make a powerful country. Right? By uniting together with our together as a nation, we're able to create a powerful nation state. So you have this idea of nationalism, has several characteristics. Sovereignty doesn't come from God, it doesn't come from the king, it comes from the nation, which in this case means a group of people. Right? It comes from the nation, the group of people. And the United States is based on the idea of nationalism, right? We the people of the United States. Right? That's where the Constitution gets its legal power from. It comes from us. And so sovereignty comes from the nation. Each nation, each group of people should have its own state. So Koreans have a Korean state. Well, actually, Korea is a case where nationalism will work out because you have one nation with two states. That's why Koreans want to unify, because you should have one nation for each state. There's one Japanese people, there's one Japanese state, there's one Japanese government. There's one British people, so there's one British state, and so forth. There's only one France. So, and the nation state should be your primary loyalty, according to nationalism. It shouldn't be your religion, it shouldn't be your village, it shouldn't be your economic class. This is why nationalism and communism theoretically don't get along. Right? Communism says theoretically that your class should be your primary loyalty. Nationalism says it should be your nation. And it's easy to remember this stuff about the nation because it's in the word nationalism. Right? Always, it's in the word if you have trouble with it. In addition, people are supposed to be not subjects who just pay their taxes, but are supposed to be citizens who aren't passive but are active in supporting the government. To give you an example of this, a peasant in the 1600s just would have been expected to pay his taxes in most countries. But in the 19th century in Europe, you're expected to do a lot more for your country. You're supposed to be willing to sacrifice for your country. You're supposed to be willing to die for your country, according to nationalism. You're supposed to be actively serving your country. To give you an example of this, Germans in World War I voluntarily sent in their wedding rings to the government to get the gold so the government could fight the war. I mean, that's nationalism. The government didn't force them to do that. They voluntarily did that to fight for the war effort. In 1996, Korea had to borrow money from the International Monetary Fund, and they were actually able to pay back the money earlier because Korean people donated money to the government, right, in order to pay back the money earlier. This wasn't a tax. No one forced them to. Korean people voluntarily donated the money. That's nationalism. Right? So in this system, one thing I want to stress, liberals and nationalists often got along together. There's that question, what is liberalism? Liberalism and nationalism usually go hand in hand. You can be a liberal and a nationalist, no problem. Because liberals often look to the nation state, to the government, as the protector of liberty. And you can see that's particularly in the United States. We, the people of the United States, right? That's how our Constitution starts off. And our Constitution has a Bill of Rights that protects your liberty. George Washington was a nationalist and a liberal. Right? And I explained this in the video, but just to be clear, when I say liberal here, I don't mean people who... we sometimes in the United States, we use liberal to mean signing the same thing as member of the Democratic Party. I'm not using liberal in that way. According to this definition of liberal, both Republicans and Democrats are liberals. Right? It's a different use of the term. So nationalism is going to be able to help cross that great divide between the elite and the common people. It's going to increasingly replace religion. And one thing I just want to point out too, there's a difference in the kind of nationalism. Some nationalism is based on loyalty to a constitution. That's like the United States. Anyone can become an American citizen. Some is ethnic though. That's similar to Korean or Japanese nationalism, where it's based on your blood, your ethnic ties. And one thing I just also want to emphasize, nationalism is going to provide power. If you want to have a powerful country, you need to have your people nationalistic, because then they're willing to support, they're going to be unified behind your country, they're going to support your country, they're going to voluntarily give your country money and die for your country when necessary. Now, this is threatening to some people. There's this question, who's this threatening to? It's threatening to multi-ethnic countries. So, for example, the Austrian Empire, right there, was made up of over 11 different nationalities. Germans, Hungarians, Romanians, Czechs, Slovaks, Slovenes, Croatians, Serbians, Italians, Ruthenians. All of these people are different nations. They could all claim to have their own state. And if they all get their